So you may have heard it said that sexuality is a spectrum. A lot of times when people are talking about sexuality, specifically asexuality, they will use this phrase and talk about it being fluid and it always changes and it's a spectrum and blah, blah, blah. But like, what does that actually mean, especially in relation to being an asexual person? So a spectrum just basically means there's like a lot of gray area. I think sexuality is something that can be ever changing, you know, it evolves and grows as you change and you age. And I think especially people on the queer spectrum, on the LGBT side of things, if you're not straight, sexuality can be very, very strange. Specifically, if you go into some of these really minor sexualities, thinking about asexuality as a whole, there's a lot of gray area because it's still fresh and also it's just very weird. Like, ace people have a difficult time understanding sexuality as a whole. And so it's very hard for us to find a label that really pins and nails us down because it's so gray and it doesn't make a lot of sense. When you're talking about asexuality as a spectrum, it's important to note that asexuality tends to have a lot of different labels. Now there are the main labels that a lot of people will know, like, hey, I'm asexual, hey, I'm aromantic, hey, I'm demisexual, you know, and you hear those a lot and a lot of people can relate to that type of label. But there is just like, you will hear a lot of different labels. I've seen it in my comments section. I've seen it on forums, all over on Twitter. There's just a lot of different labels for sexuality on the ace side of things. And so I have a lot of videos explaining the different types of asexuality. But I think talking about asexuality as a spectrum, it's important to note that not every ace person is the same. All of us have a lot of different idiosyncrasies and a lot of different labels to describe ourselves because we're all so different and unique. One straight person, I feel like, is normally the same as another straight person. You know, maybe they have a couple differences between them, but their sexuality is generally the same. Two ace people can be drastically different, mainly because we split up our labels into different types of categories. For instance, you could have one ace person who is demisexual, ace, biromantic, and sex positive versus somebody else who is aromantic, gray ace, who is sex repulsed, you know? And so we have a lot of different labels for things, and it can be very difficult and confusing if you're outside of the ace sphere to come in and understand what's happening. But I think the most important thing to understand is that not all ace people are the same, and the ace experience is different for every single person. One of the things that I think people really want to do in the allosexual world is they try and box us in with our label of asexual, and they just assume that, oh, you don't want to have sex because you're asexual, and that's it. That's end of story. That's it. Whereas ace people are like, okay, so let me sit you down. I have about 3 different labels. Let me tell you what sex repulse means. Here's what demisexual is. I'm also gray ace. Here's what that means. And you're just like, I had no idea there were so many sexualities. And on top of that, a lot of people will use the ace label with other labels, you know? So I know a lot of people who are like ace lesbians. And so that basically means a lot of different things. It can mean whatever you want it to mean, honestly. But often that'll mean that they're on the ace spectrum, but they're also like attracted to girls in some way or another. And again, it's all a spectrum. So I think oftentimes allosexual people will put us into a box so it's easier to understand us, when in actuality, like, we just need so much more to explain ourselves. Labels can be really harmful in some ways because it can be hard to nail down your sexuality. It can be hard to explain what these feelings are. And so it can be difficult for some people to settle into one label because it all just feels very gray to them. However, I think labels are super important, especially on the ace side of things, because it can help you feel less alone and it can help you better understand and express yourself. I think a lot of times we as humans want to relate to other people, and that is the way we view the world, is by looking at others and saying, oh my God, me too. I also do that. Me too. And so having a label, having this way to explain your side of the spectrum to another person can make you feel seen that otherwise you wouldn't be able to. And I think it's also important to note that, like, because it's a spectrum, because it's always changing, like, you may not have the same label down the line that you have right now. For instance, about 5 years ago when I first started coming out as ace, I was convinced that I was heteroromantic. I thought I wanted to have a relationship with a man, but I wasn't interested in sex. I thought that's what it was. And now I'm coming to find out that it's not exactly true, which is why I kind of have changed my label to gray romantic asexual, leaning more towards aromantic than anything else. And so that's why it's important to keep in mind that it is a spectrum. There are a lot of people who will have caveats and say like, I don't like using a label, like I just identify as queer, I'm gray ace because I don't really know what I am. And that is so valid. Whether you're somebody who knows deep down that they are like extremely biromantic ace, like that's great. But if you're somebody who's more like, I don't know, I'm gray ace, I'm queer, that's all I got, I know I'm on the ace spectrum, there shouldn't be boxes and gatekeeping and hoops we have to jump through just to explain that like we aren't attracted to anybody sexually, you know? And so part of why I love the ace community is we are very open and we kind of let anybody in, you know? If you feel like you don't want to have sex with somebody, you have a space in the ace community. It's harder on the other side to go from the ace community into the bigger LGBT community. But for the most part, I think keeping in mind that it is a spectrum can be very helpful. Whether you're understanding your own sexuality or understanding somebody else's, just understanding the spectrum can be really, really helpful. So if you want to learn more about the different types of asexuality, I have lots of videos up, lots of resources, but you're welcome to talk in the comments. I know there are a lot of people down there who could really help you out.